Sex workers are amping up their campaign efforts in pursuit of national decriminalisation after sex workers in Adelaide were arrested, threatened and left jobless in police brothel raids. Cameron Cox, CEO of the Sex Workers Outreach Program, got into the industry at age 17. He empathises with the sex workers targeted in the Adelaide brothel raids.
First of all, I was sort of horrified because I feel for the people who were involved in those raids. You're at your workplace, doing your job, trying to make a living, possibly to support your children or your family or whatever, and all of a sudden there are police busting in and arresting people left, right and centre.
When the brothels shut down, sex workers are forced to work privately. The danger of this is that if a crime is committed against them, they have no one to report it to. If they go to the South Australian Police, they risk fines of up to $2,500 or 6 months imprisonment for revealing their line of work.
I got into sex work through just being offered money for sex on dating and hookup websites.
Mish Pony is the trans and gender diverse sex work representative for the Scarlet Alliance, the Australian Sex Workers Association. Their goal is the national decriminalisation of sex work, and they've been fighting for it since the late 80s.
So all the states and territories have different legislative models. New South Wales is the only one that has decriminalisation, and it's been shown through multiple studies that decriminalisation is the best model to protect the workers' rights and health and safety.
Legalisation, sex workers say, is nearly just as bad as criminalisation because it's such a heavily regulated system. It makes sex work legal in some circumstances but not in others, so those on the wrong side of the line can still face persecution.
Decriminalisation, basically you take all the sex work specific criminal laws off the statute books. So that's what we've done here in New South Wales.
Mr. Cox, like most sex workers, believes that stigma is one of the biggest barriers to national decriminalisation.
Yeah, stigma is really ingrained. It probably goes back thousands of years. We're a marginalised community. People see us through stereotypes, through the Hollywood stereotypes of the hooker leaning against a lamppost, the hooker with a heart of gold, all those sort of things, but it's mainly negative stereotypes.
The project recently ran a segment about an Uber driver who mistakenly picked up a sex worker thinking that she was a booked passenger. Hosts of the project thought that the scenario was hilarious, with Carrie Bickmore saying, "I can see how you would get them confused. I would have never thought that that was a sex worker."
The thing I was most disgusted about was the fact that they used the word sex worker thinking that they were being so politically correct. And there's, I know that language matters, but the reality is that sentiment matters just as much.
Sydney-based queer sex worker and uni graduate Tilly Lawless has inadvertently become a spokesperson of the industry.
Oh my God, this person's a sex worker. Who knew sex workers catch Ubers? Who knew a sex worker can be a normal person who gets in a car and and can be mistaken for an Uber passenger? That's yeah. So they're feeding into the idea, they're othering sex workers. They're feeding into the idea that sex workers aren't like other people.
In 2015, she started the hashtag Faces of Prostitution in response to a Mamma Mia article. The article argued that Julia Roberts' character in Pretty Woman is not the true face of prostitution, so Lawless rebutted with a picture of her own happy, smiling face.
The Faces of Prostitution, I inadvertently started in response to that Mamma Mia article, and the reason I started it was because I guess the reason I use that hashtag was for a few reasons. Firstly, there's usually this, there's one discourse around sex work, and it's either the glamorizing discourse or it's the demonizing discourse. And there's actually sex work, like any other profession, has a myriad of stories. Every single person who is in sex work has a different story. I think we're actually on sort of the tip of a burgeoning sex worker rights movement. I think that this is the era of sex worker rights. When you think of the fact that Amnesty International made the decision to support decrim and so many other things, it's been talked about a lot. And so I think that the hashtag just happened to organically happen at a time when sex workers had already been mobilizing, but it allowed them to mobilize perhaps to utilize social media perhaps in a way that hadn't been used to that extent before.
Lawless now has over 25,000 followers on Instagram, but says that she assumes the role of spokesperson reluctantly. Organisations like the Scarlet Alliance and the Sex Workers Outreach Program are working hard to encourage more voices to join in the fight for decriminalisation. Perhaps then, we can expect a stronger national sex workers' rights movement, aided by our increasing engagement with social media.